Super Nintendo Doom. That'd be one of the worst source ports out there. A cash grab, as it were. Now, one could make an argument for the 3DO source port, but that's going for some rather low-hanging fruit, and we're better than that. So, some say it's good, some say it's bad, but I'd like to take another good, long, hard look at it, as I'd played this a couple months ago, as at the time of this recording. Wasn't my first experience with Doom. I'd played the shareware version previously, but I'd snagged this ROM some 8-9 years ago, and given the fact that at the time it was Doom, well, I was happy. But after browsing the net, I got bit by the video bug, hearing people's complaints about it, and decided to take another good, long, hard look at this beast. So, let's see if it's as bad as people say. Alright, there's always been this age-old question in the gaming community of, will it run Doom? Given the fact that people have gotten it working on everything from graph calculators to potatoes, it's no surprise that during the 90s, given the game's popularity as it was installed on more computers than Microsoft Windows, it was ported to console. Now I know there's going to be people in the audience rolling their eyes, sticking their nose in the air, saying, "Console peasant," while getting high off their own farts, but you need to understand is that at the time, consoles were the mainline form of home electronic entertainment. And interactive entertainment at that. The main reason was the fact, compared to a computer, a console was relatively inexpensive at the time. Relatively. Now, imagine my surprise when I found out that the Super Nintendo had a port of Doom. Now, while these days this may seem trivial with the aforementioned "will it run Doom" being answered every 5 fucking seconds, it was hella impressive at the time, given the fact that the Super Nintendo was a 16-bit console system in its twilight years, did not require a bulky upgrade package, and could support online multiplayer. Now, why does this matter? Well, dear viewer, I'm going to have to go on a bit of a tangent with some nerd shit as to why this is important, so please bear with me. First things first, Doom on PC requires a 486 or better computer, a Sound Blaster Pro or 100% compatible card, and 24 megabytes of RAM. Now, these days, it may not seem like much, especially the space requirements, but back then, it was fairly large. Now, Christ, I feel fucking old talking about this. Anyways, without getting too much into the nitty-gritty, these were essentially the Alienware's, the 480 RTX of their day. For example, Total Annihilation, another game that appears quite frequently on my channel, requires a minimum of 16 megabytes of RAM and 100 megahertz CPU at minimum, and 24 megabytes of RAM and 133 megahertz of CPU at maximum. So yeah, Doom was fairly hardware intensive for its time, especially given the fact that it came out about 4 years earlier. Now, here's the thing. Doom and Doom 2 were able to run on MS-DOS. This was a 16-bit system. However, it had a built-in extension called DOS 4GW, which to my understanding extends the amount of memory available on 16-bit systems by addressing up to 64 megabytes of extended memory. Doom had this programmed internally, as did a number of other games. There's a lot more to it, but the risk of sounding like an idiot who doesn't know what the hell he's talking about, I'll leave a link in the description if you want to dig up the subject. Now, given what I just told you, why do I say that this is impressive? You don't know, do you? Well, for that, we'll need to delve a little bit deeper into ye old Super Nintendo. So at the time this came out, the system was a bit old. It was released in 1990 in Japan as the Super Famicom and released here in North America in 91 under the name Super Nintendo Entertainment System. And at the time, it was fairly powerful, relatively speaking. It featured a Ryko 5AA2 processor, which had 3.58 megahertz of processing power and the ability to handle both 8 and 16-bit processes. More than adequate for most games of the day. But this was well below the requirements for Doom. Now, under normal circumstances, Doom, as stated, would not be able to run on this system. However, this is where a fellow by the name of Randy Linden comes in. And he was able to get it working by writing a new engine known as the Reality Engine, specifically built for the Super Nintendo version of Doom. Alright, I know this doesn't seem all that impressive, as I know there's that one jackass in the audience going, "A new engine for this trash console. So weak and pathetic. It needed special treatment to run Doom. How could it not run this perfectly balanced, holy divine relic of computer programming?" Well, 1. Shut up. 2. You would be right about the previous statement. It couldn't run Doom, not on its own. However, at the time, the Super Nintendo did have one thing going for it, and that was the Super FX graphics chip. This enabled the system to render 3D polygons. However, it had to be integrated into a game's cartridge. It couldn't be integrated into the Super Nintendo itself. And I know there's people asking, if it was so powerful, why couldn't it run Doom? That's the thing. It couldn't. Not initially. According to an interview with Nintendo Life, Mr. Linden had this to say: "Development of the game was challenging as there were no development kits for the Super FX at the time." So, the dude literally had to scratch build his own dev kit. This consisted of a hacked together Star Fox cartridge, which was the only game at the time with the Super FX chip, a modified Super Nintendo controllers, which were plugged into a console, and then the console was linked via serial port to an Amiga. This dude basically had to build his linker, debugger, and assembler to get this game working. And this is damn impressive, because this right here is what an Amiga looks like. I'll throw up a picture of it. This is what an Amiga looks like. So he essentially ended up creating a prototype and presented it to a company known as Sculptured Software, who then assembled a dev team to assist Mr. Linden in the creation of the game. Now, my dear viewer, if you've managed to spare what brain cells haven't been rotted by TikTok and Twitter to get this far, you'll understand why this is impressive. We're spoiled today by easy-to-use dev kits like the built-in tools in Unreal 5 and RPG Maker. This was the wild, wacky days of game development where mountains were moved with spoons. Even then, there were limits. The game almost completely filled the cartridge, requiring some levels, among other things, to be cut, and it only had 16 megabytes left. But it was able to support the Super Scope, the mouse apparatus for the console, and had multiplayer support. Again, this is impressive as hell, as it did not require extensive upgrades to the system, so from a technical standpoint, it is pretty damn impressive. But does this impressiveness extend to the game itself? Yes and no. So first things first, we're going to go over gameplay and then work our way down to graphics. So gameplay is a bit of a hit and miss. When you first fire it up, you don't get a menu. Instead, it just drops you right down to E1 N1 and starts you on I'm Too Young to Die. And soft locks later episodes behind difficulty, even though the game will let you progress from episode 1 to episode 2 on the easiest difficulty. But if you want to play through without going through E1, you need to select Hurt Me Plenty. If you want to play on Inferno, you need to access it on either Ultraviolence or Nightmare. Apparently the Japanese version allows you to play all episodes regardless of difficulty, but I've not been able to obtain a copy. One thing I am going to note before we proceed any further is that Nightmare difficulty does not respawn enemies, but it does make them fast and tough. So yeah, small mercies, eh? Movement's a bit clunky. There seems to be a delay between my input and what happens on screen. At first I had chalked this up to an emulation issue, but after browsing the Doom World forums and the Hellhole as Reddit for a little bit, it turns out I am not the only one to observe this. So yeah, fighting with your controller, or in this case keyboard, not a good thing. This actually led to me eating more M fireballs than usual, although this can also be partially chalked up to my lack of skill at the game. Strafing seems to work just fine though. But that brings us to another snag. Strafing and turning, mutually exclusive. This is due to the fact the Reality Engine always renders enemies facing forward, so some concession had to be made. I will say that there were instances when I was playing that I would randomly get stuck in walls or just suddenly slow down. This was most apparent during Sloth of Despair, as I think in this case the Reality Engine has problems with levels with complex geometry, and myself and enemies would get stuck in walls, or I would randomly slow down at certain points. And it wasn't necessarily even just this level that the whole slowing down and getting stuck in walls happened on, but it seemed to be the most common. I don't know if this is a bug or, again, the Reality Engine having trouble keeping track of where enemies and the player is, but it is there. So, the movement is a bit of a bust. How's the gameplay? Well, on the surface, it's pretty much bog standard Doom. Guns seem to work as intended with a few minor tweaks here and there. Chain gun is now capable of single fire, although when it fires, it will sound like it fired 2 shots, even though it only fired 1. I don't know if this is a bug or a glitch or whatever, but it's there. Plasma rifle and rocket launcher have both gotten a buff. Plasma rifle is capable of firing a pinky in 2 shots, whereas the rocket launcher can 3-shot a Baron. However, this increased damage, especially with the rocket launcher, does pose a risk to the player, as you can potentially one-shot yourself if an enemy is too close and you fire in panic. It should be noted that the weapon selection system is also cycle-based, which means that planning is pretty much warranted before you enter a room, especially on higher difficulties, because there's nothing like having to whip out your rocket launcher in a hurry when you have a Baron of Hell barreling down on you like a freight train and you end up accidentally selecting your fists. One other thing that I did notice, gunplay wise, is that sometimes rockets will phase through enemies. I don't know if this is the case with the plasma rifle, but I did happen to see it during Pandemonium. I don't know if there were any other cases. I would have to go back through the footage, but I didn't see any. It might have just been the only instance of it. This could be a bug with the Reality Engine, could be a bug with the weapon. I don't know. If you all happen to see something like that, let me know in the comments below. Enemies are deaf in this game, so yeah, you don't have to worry about when you fire your shotgun alerting the entire room, but because enemies are always front-facing, it does mean, however, that corner peeking is not as viable of a strategy as you would think unless you're extremely careful. I've tried it, and I've ended up alerting the entire monster horde, and it's gotten me killed on more than one occasion. So, yeah, that's really interesting. AI is a bit wonky. And here's the thing, it's still bog standard Doom AI. It sees the player, it moves towards the player, it shoots at the player. But because enemies are constantly facing forward and given the unusual movement, there are times where the enemy can seem smarter than they actually are. As you can see in this clip here, I got outflanked by a Baron of Hell. That was real interesting. Something I should note in this game, or I should say port, is in Super Nintendo Doom, one of the biggest issues in combat is feedback. There's no bullet puffs or blood. This means the only time you can ever tell if an enemy's actually getting hit is when they flinch, which unfortunately leads to our next issue, graphics. Okay, so graphics. I'm not going to spend too much time on this as it's already been complained about numerous times, but I will go on the record to say that the Reality Engine does have trouble rendering the game, and this is not surprising that even with the Super FX chip, even with the custom built engine for this source port, the Super Nintendo was not built to run Doom. And this comes at the cost of floors and ceilings not rendering correctly, although the walls look really nice, which I guess is good. Enemies and objects don't render correctly at a distance, mean that even though you know they're there, you may not immediately register, leading to you taking a lot of unnecessary damage. I noticed something else, that enemies don't play through all their frames when moving and attacking. This kind of leads to them doing almost like this weird jig. Pretty funny to watch, but it's a bit irritating when playing on higher difficulties and you end up getting used as a chew toy by the demons. The plasma rifle and BFG have fewer animations. The plasma rifle's plasma ball takes up the entire screen, and the BFG uses the Baron of Hell fireball. Although the effect is the same, basically everything in the general vicinity of the impact dies. And there's a few other things that I can't think of off the top of my head. I'll probably end up making a list of them at some point, but it goes on and on. And also note that a lot of the satanic imagery, a lot of the visages of gore and torture were removed mainly due to concerns from Nintendo, even though you can clearly see the third episode takes place in hell. You can see heads on pikes, and supposedly all the jibbed corpses were replaced by marine corpses, although this is bullshit, because you still see jibbed marine corpses, and enemies still have their gory deaths. Blood spurts do not render, neither do bullet puffs. Again, this is a rendering issue for the Reality Engine. One other thing I will say is that the Super Nintendo version, unlike the Atari Jaguar and the Sega ports, has the Spider Mastermind and Cyber Demon in it. So, yeah, that's pretty damn impressive. But still, overall, not too impressed by the graphics, but from a technical standpoint, it is pretty impressive considering the system. Okay, so sound design. What can I say about sound design? Well, it sounds like Doom. It's not great, though, but certainly a step above other ports. A few sounds have been changed here and there. The Demon, in spite of using the standard alert and attack sounds, uses the same pain and death sound from the Imp, and the Lost Soul and Kako share the same alert sound. The BFG and Plasma Gun share the Fireball sound with the Imp, Kako, and Baron of Hell, respectively, and it does get choppy when there's too much going on screen, although the music's pretty good. Probably the best part of the port. And it's certainly a step above the Jaguar port, which has no music, and the Sega port, which has, well, the less said about that soundtrack, the better. I will link a playlist in the description below, and you can just go listen to it for yourself. The 3DO port actually had pretty good music, but again, we're trying not to go for low-hanging fruit, although I personally prefer the PSX port. But again, for what it is, it's pretty damn good. So, much like the gameplay and graphics, the sound design is pretty much hit and miss. Okay, so multiplayer. I didn't have a chance to test this, but there is a video out there. I will throw a link to it in the description below if you want to take a look. It was a thing, and it was played over something called X-Band. Long story short, the rules were simple. 5 frags, and the first player to exit the level wins. And by and by, it's impressive. It should be noted that player corpses disappear, but they do drop weapons. However, weapons and items do not respawn, limiting the resources in a level and preventing things from dragging out. So it's usually a battle of attrition. And I can actually see that making things go a lot faster in a multiplayer deathmatch. It should also be noted that no other sounds play aside from music, and this is likely due to memory issues to cut down on lag. But still, multiplayer Doom and Super Nintendo, pretty damn impressive. Alright, so for my final conclusion, as much fun as I had with this port, as much as I laughed getting footage, it's not great. Again, as stated, from a technical standpoint, especially with multiplayer, the fact they even got it to work on the Nintendo system at all, Mr. Lennon and his team at Sculptured Software should be proud of themselves for their achievement. But looking at it from a player's perspective, it is not good. Between the buggy, clunky movement, the poor feedback in combat, and the graphical issues, it's no wonder why it was so widely criticized. However, it didn't keep me from enjoying my time with the port. Maybe I'm just easily amused, but to each their own. This is the first time I've ever tackled a video on this scale, and it shows. I'm sure I made quite a few rookie mistakes, but that's part of growing as a content creator. This video was actually supposed to be out yesterday, but I'd accidentally deleted some of the voice work, and I'd also been sick the last couple days, so my voice sounds a little different. But the good news is, I think the voice work that I did or had to redo actually turned out a lot better. Now, for those of you wondering why I did this kind of video, this is going to mark a change in content on my channel. Now, I'm still going to be doing Let's Plays, I'm still going to turn out the odd music piece, and this will remain primarily a gaming channel, but at the same time, I will be covering various game-related topics in these style of videos. So, hopefully, this will be a bit of an adventure. I'm looking forward to it. Anyway, I've been Farsi Salty VTuber. I'll see y'all later.